The ruins of Aurelian stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of broken towers and crumbled arches. Jonas Carter stepped carefully, his boots crunching against shards of alien glass. The air was heavy with dust and silence, broken only by the occasional groan of a distant structure succumbing to time. He adjusted his visor, scanning the area for any valuable scraps. This world had been abandoned for centuries, yet its secrets still beckoned treasure hunters like him. As Jonas crouched to examine a strange metallic fragment, a sharp, piercing scream echoed through the ruins. He froze, his pulse quickening. The sound was unmistakable, a cry of pain or fear, and it was close. He turned slowly, scanning the desolate landscape. "Hello," he called, his voice reverberating through the hollow spaces. Silence answered him. The scream had vanished as suddenly as it had come. Jonas debated with himself. The ruins were dangerous, littered with traps and unstable structures. Anyone smart enough to survive out here knew to avoid trouble, but something about the scream tugged at him. It wasn't just the sound, it was the sheer desperation in it. Gripping his multi-tool tightly, Jonas began moving toward the direction of the scream. The path ahead was treacherous, with collapsed walkways and jagged edges, but his instincts urged him forward. Every step felt heavier, as if the ruins themselves were watching him. He brushed aside his unease and focused on the trail. It wasn't long before he spotted a faint glow ahead. The light flickered like a dying ember, barely visible against the gloom. He approached cautiously, keeping to the shadows. As he turned a corner, he saw her. A young alien girl lay trapped beneath a fallen archway, her delicate body pinned under heavy stone. Her skin shimmered faintly, glowing with an iridescent hue that shifted like a living aurora. She wasn't like any alien Jonas had ever seen. Her large, luminous eyes locked onto him, wide with fear and pain. Jonas hesitated. The girl looked fragile, almost ethereal, and completely out of place in these ruins. She clutched something close to her chest, a strange artifact that pulsed faintly with light. He stepped closer, lowering his multi-tool to show he wasn't a threat. "It's okay," he said softly, unsure if she could understand him. "I'm here to help." The girl flinched but didn't look away. Jonas knelt beside her, inspecting the rubble. The stones were heavy but not immovable. With some effort, he could free her. This might hurt a little, he warned, though he doubted she understood. He activated his tool, using its plasma cutter to slice through the larger chunks of debris. The girl whimpered but stayed still, watching him with a mix of fear and hope. After several tense minutes, Jonas managed to lift the final piece of stone. The girl gasped as she sat up, clutching her artifact tightly. Jonas offered her a hand, but she didn't take it. Instead, she stared at him, her lips trembling as if trying to speak. Before Jonas could say anything, a distant roar echoed through the ruins, sending a shiver down his spine. They weren't alone. "Looks like we've got company," he muttered, glancing at the girl. "We need to move. Now." The girl nodded hesitantly, her glowing eyes fixed on him. Jonas couldn't tell if she trusted him yet, but he knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. Jonas and the alien girl moved quickly through the ruins, her bare feet silent on the broken ground, while his boots clunked loudly with every step. He kept glancing back, his senses on high alert. The distant roar he had heard earlier wasn't just in his head. Something, or someone, was out there, and the weight of the silence felt heavier with every passing second. The girl clutched her strange artifact like it was her lifeline, its faint pulsing light reflecting on her iridescent skin. She was clearly terrified, though she followed Jonas without hesitation. Her glowing eyes darted around nervously, as if expecting danger to leap out from the shadows. Jonas tried to keep calm. He wasn't sure what he had stumbled into, but it was clear that this girl was in trouble. Her presence in the ruins made no sense, and neither did that strange object she refused to let go of. Whatever it was, it had to be important. "Do you understand me?" Jonas asked quietly, glancing at her as they hurried through a narrow corridor of broken walls. The girl didn't reply, but her gaze flickered toward him for a moment, as if she recognized the tone of his voice, even if not the words. That was something, at least. Suddenly, the roar came again, this time closer. It was low and guttural, the kind of sound that made the hair on Jonas's neck stand on end. He gritted his teeth and quickened his pace, gesturing for the girl to follow. She didn't need convincing. They emerged into a vast open plaza, its surface cracked and overgrown with alien vines that glowed faintly in the dim light. In the center stood a crumbling statue of a figure Jonas didn't recognize, its face eroded by time. He scanned the area for a safe path, but his heart sank as he heard heavy footsteps echoing from behind. "Stay close," he whispered, gripping his multi-tool tightly. The girl moved closer, her trembling fingers brushing against his arm. He glanced at her, surprised by the trust in her eyes despite her fear. A shadow moved at the edge of the plaza. Then another. Jonas's stomach twisted. Shapes emerged from the darkness. 3 figures, tall and armored, their faces hidden behind angular helmets. They carried weapons that looked far more advanced than anything Jonas had ever seen. The lead figure raised a hand, pointing directly at the girl. "Hand her over," a distorted voice demanded, echoing through the ruins. The language wasn't Earth standard, but Jonas understood the intent well enough. Jonas's grip on his tool tightened. "Not happening," he muttered under his breath. The girl whimpered, clutching his arm tightly now. Her artifact's light grew brighter, casting an eerie glow across the plaza. The lead figure hesitated, seemingly startled by the change, but then stepped forward again. Jonas knew he couldn't fight them, not directly. "Run," he shouted, grabbing the girl's hand and pulling her toward a crumbling archway on the far side of the plaza. She stumbled but kept pace, her glowing feet skimming the ground. Blaster fire erupted behind them, streaks of blue energy slicing through the air. Jonas ducked and pushed the girl ahead of him, shielding her as best he could. Stones shattered around them, sending shards flying in all directions. They reached the archway just as a shot struck the ground beside them, throwing up a cloud of dust. Jonas didn't look back. He and the girl disappeared into the dark tunnel beyond, their breaths ragged, hearts pounding. "Who are these people?" Jonas muttered to himself, glancing at the girl as they ran. She didn't answer, but her eyes glimmered with something he hadn't seen before: determination. Whatever she was hiding, Jonas realized, it was worth risking his life for. Jonas and the girl ran through the dark tunnel, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the narrow space. The air was damp and cold, filled with the smell of ancient stone and decay. Behind them, the sound of the pursuing mercenaries grew louder, their footsteps heavy and relentless. Jonas glanced at the girl, her glowing form casting an eerie light in the otherwise pitch-black passage. She had not said a word since they began running, but her grip on his hand was tight, almost desperate. She was scared, he could tell, but there was something else in her eyes, something that made Jonas believe she wasn't just some helpless creature. There was strength in her, even if she didn't know how to use it yet. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly. They passed broken walls and shattered remains of what appeared to be old, advanced technology. Jonas knew they were deep in the ruins now, far from the surface, and any chance of quick escape. Suddenly, a blast of light lit up the tunnel behind them. Jonas whipped around just in time to see a bolt of energy streak past his shoulder, narrowly missing him. The mercenaries had found them, and they weren't going to stop until they had the girl and the artifact she carried. Jonas pulled the girl to a stop and pressed himself against the cold stone wall. He held a finger to his lips, signaling for her to be quiet. She nodded, though her chest rose and fell rapidly with fear. Jonas peeked around the corner, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead. The mercenaries were getting closer, their voices low and urgent. They were talking about their mission, how they had orders to capture the girl, no matter what it took. The words didn't matter to Jonas. What did matter was that they were getting closer. His mind raced. He needed a plan, something to throw them off and buy them some time. Glancing around, he saw that the tunnel split into two directions ahead. One path was narrow and winding, the other wider but filled with broken debris. It wasn't much of a choice, but he had to act quickly. "Follow me," Jonas whispered, pulling the girl toward the wider path. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting between him and the approaching danger, but then she followed without question. They moved quickly, ducking under fallen beams and maneuvering around shattered pieces of alien machinery. Jonas could hear the mercenaries' voices getting louder as they approached the split in the tunnel. "Which way did they go?" one of the mercenaries asked, his voice harsh. "I'm not sure," another one replied. "Check the left side. I'll take the right." Jonas's heart pounded in his chest. He knew they wouldn't be able to outrun them for long. He had to think of something clever. As they neared a large archway ahead, Jonas noticed a panel on the wall that looked different from the others. It was covered in strange symbols, but there was a small button in the center, almost like a keypad. He reached for it without thinking, pressing the button. A low hum filled the air, and the ground beneath them rumbled. The girl glanced up at him, wide-eyed. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Jonas muttered, "but let's hope it works." Suddenly, the tunnel shook, and a massive stone door dropped down, blocking the path behind them. The mercenaries slammed into it moments later, but the door held firm, trapping them on the other side. Jonas let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their own breathing and the distant hum of the ancient technology. But it wouldn't be long before the mercenaries found another way around. "That should buy us some time," Jonas said, though he knew it wasn't a permanent solution. "We need to keep moving." The girl nodded, still holding tightly to the artifact. Jonas couldn't help but wonder what it was about the glowing object that made it so important. Whoever those mercenaries were, they wouldn't stop until they had it. And her. As they pressed on deeper into the ruins, Jonas knew that their journey had just begun, and that the girl, and the secret she carried, were far more dangerous than he could have imagined. Jonas and the girl moved through the winding tunnels, their steps quiet against the stone floor. The air was thick with the scent of ancient dust and the faint hum of something long forgotten. They had been running for what felt like hours, but the deeper they went into the ruins, the more Jonas felt like they were walking into the heart of something ancient and dangerous. The girl, who had been mostly silent since the chase began, was still clutching the glowing artifact. The light from it illuminated their path, casting strange shadows on the walls. Jonas couldn't stop staring at it. The way it pulsed with energy, the way it seemed almost alive, made him wonder what secrets it held. "Why do they want you?" Jonas asked quietly, not sure if she could understand him. But the girl only looked at him, her eyes filled with fear and something else, a deep sadness. She didn't speak, not a single word, but Jonas could feel the weight of her silence. They reached another chamber, this one even larger than the last. The walls were covered in strange symbols, glowing faintly in the darkness. The air felt cooler here, and there was a faint vibration under their feet, as though the ruins themselves were alive. Jonas paused for a moment, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. The symbols were unfamiliar, but he had a strange feeling that they weren't just decorations. They were part of something bigger. The girl stepped forward, her bare feet making no sound on the stone floor. She moved as if drawn to something, her eyes fixed on a particular wall. Jonas followed her, curiosity building. She reached out and placed a hand on the wall, and to his surprise, the symbols began to glow brighter. The ground beneath them trembled slightly, and Jonas instinctively took a step back. The girl looked at him, her expression unreadable, before pressing the artifact against the wall. There was a soft click, and then the wall in front of them shifted, revealing the hidden passage. "Whoa," Jonas muttered, his mind racing. "What the heck is going on here?" The girl didn't answer, but she stepped into the passage as if she had known it would open all along. Jonas hesitated for a moment, then followed her inside. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for the two of them to walk side by side. The air grew colder, and the strange humming noise grew louder. Jonas felt like they were walking deeper into the very heart of the ruin. As they moved further into the passage, the walls began to change. The symbols on them became more intricate, and the glow intensified. It wasn't just a faint light anymore. It was powerful, almost blinding in its intensity. Jonas squinted, trying to make out what the symbols meant, but they were too complex. At the end of the passage, they came to a large, circular chamber. In the center was a pedestal, and on the pedestal was a glowing crystal, similar to the artifact the girl held. The crystal pulsed with energy, just like the artifact. Jonas felt a surge of curiosity and fear. What was this place? What was the connection between the crystal and the artifact? The girl walked forward, her eyes fixed on the pedestal. She placed the artifact next to the crystal, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the two objects began to glow brighter and brighter, until the entire chamber was filled with light. Jonas shielded his eyes, but the light seemed to penetrate his very soul. Suddenly, a voice boomed from the walls, echoing through the chamber. It wasn't a voice he could understand, but there was no mistaking the tone. It was ancient, filled with authority and power. The girl stepped back, her face pale, but she didn't take her eyes off the pedestal. Jonas realized with a shock that the artifact was not just a simple object. It was a key to something much larger. The question was, what would happen when it unlocked whatever it was meant to open, and how much danger were they truly in? The girl turned to Jonas, her eyes filled with a new sense of urgency. He didn't need her to say anything. He knew it was time to move, before whatever was coming came for them. Jonas and the girl stood frozen in the glowing chamber, the bright light from the artifact and crystal illuminating the walls. The hum of energy filled the air, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. Jonas could feel his heart pounding, the tension in the room almost unbearable. The voice that had echoed through the chamber seemed to have stopped, but the eerie silence that followed was just as unnerving. The girl, her wide eyes fixed on the pedestal, seemed to be waiting for something. Her body was tense, as though she expected something to happen, something dangerous. Jonas didn't know what to make of it. He had already seen enough to know that whatever was happening here was far beyond anything he had expected when he first stepped foot in the ruins. The artifact wasn't just a glowing trinket. It was part of something much larger, something that could change everything. Suddenly, the floor beneath them trembled. Jonas's heart skipped a beat as the rumbling grew louder, shaking the very walls. The light from the pedestal flickered, and the girl took a step back, her expression one of fear and uncertainty. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing noise. Jonas's eyes narrowed. He had been expecting this. The mercenaries would eventually catch up with them, but this was different. This was bigger. Whatever power the artifact had triggered was drawing attention, and the energy surge was likely sending signals to anyone nearby. Before Jonas could respond, the chamber's entrance exploded with a burst of light, and a group of armed figures stepped through. They were dressed in black armor, their faces hidden behind sleek helmets. The leader of the group stepped forward, his hand raised in a commanding gesture. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice cold and mechanical. The group spread out, surrounding Jonas and the girl. Jonas instinctively moved to shield the girl, his hand reaching for his multi-tool. But he knew this wouldn't be a simple fight. These mercenaries weren't just armed, they were prepared. Whoever they were working for, they had the resources to find them here, in the heart of the ruins. The girl's grip on the artifact tightened, her face pale. She glanced at Jonas, her eyes filled with panic. Jonas could feel her fear, but he also sensed something else, a deep, unspoken sadness. The artifact had led them here, but now it seemed like it was pulling them towards something they couldn't control. "You don't understand," Jonas said, his voice steady despite the situation. "We don't want any trouble. Just let us leave, and we'll go." The mercenary leader chuckled darkly. "You think we're here to negotiate? We're here to take her," he said, nodding toward the girl. "And the artifact. We were paid well to retrieve them both." Jonas's stomach tightened. He had been warned that these mercenaries were dangerous. But this was different. He wasn't dealing with ordinary criminals. These were people who had made their deal with someone who wanted the artifact for a reason. A reason that Jonas couldn't even begin to understand. But then, to his shock, the girl spoke. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried a weight of authority that surprised him. "No," she said firmly. "I won't let you take it." The mercenaries paused, confusion crossing their faces. They clearly hadn't expected her to speak, let alone resist. Jonas glanced at the girl, surprised by the sudden change in her demeanor. It was as though she had found something deep within herself, a strength that hadn't been there before. She took a step forward, standing tall and proud, despite the danger surrounding them. "You can't stop me," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "This is my home, my people's legacy." The mercenary leader hesitated, clearly unsettled by her words. But then, with a swift motion, he gave the order. "Take them both." The mercenaries moved in, but before they could reach the girl, the chamber shook again. The ground beneath them rumbled, and the lights flickered wildly. Something was happening. Jonas didn't have time to think. The girl raised the artifact high above her head, and in that instant, the entire chamber erupted with light. A wave of energy shot out from the artifact, knocking the mercenaries back and sending them crashing into the walls. Jonas shielded his eyes, but when the light finally faded, the mercenaries were lying unconscious on the floor. The girl lowered the artifact, breathing heavily, her hands shaking. Jonas could barely comprehend what had just happened. The artifact had done this. It had protected them. But there was no time to celebrate. The mercenaries wouldn't stay down for long, and the power from the artifact had likely attracted even more attention. They had to move, and they had to move fast. Jonas and the girl fled through the darkened corridors of the ancient ruin, the echoes of their hurried footsteps bouncing off the stone walls. The mercenaries were still unconscious behind them, but Jonas knew it wouldn't last. The light from the artifact still pulsed faintly, casting an eerie glow in the otherwise pitch-black passages. The girl, now moving with more confidence, stayed close by his side, her eyes flickering with a strange combination of determination and fear. Jonas wasn't sure if she fully understood the gravity of what had just happened or what they were walking into. But one thing was clear. The artifact was powerful, and someone, or something, wanted it badly. They continued down the winding paths, the walls becoming narrower as they ventured deeper into the ruins. The air grew colder, heavier with every step they took. The further they went, the more it seemed like the ruins themselves were alive, pulsing with ancient energy, as if waiting for them to reach a destination. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of walking through darkness, they arrived at a massive stone door. It was unlike anything Jonas had seen before, etched with intricate symbols and glowing faintly with a strange, almost magnetic energy. The girl stepped forward, her hand trembling, as she reached out to touch the door. She paused, as though listening to something only she could hear. Then, without warning, she pressed the artifact against the stone. There was a soft hum, and the door slowly began to open, revealing the hidden chamber beyond. Jonas's breath caught in his throat as the door creaked open, revealing a massive underground city. The city was stunning. Towering spires of alien architecture reached toward the cavern's ceiling, bathed in the soft glow of strange energy sources embedded in the walls. The floor was made of smooth stone, polished to a shine, and in the distance, he could see signs of long-forgotten technology still humming with life. The city was beautiful, but it was also clearly ancient, untouched by time. It looked as though it had been abandoned for centuries, yet everything still functioned as if it were alive. "Where are we?" Jonas whispered, more to himself than to the girl. She turned to him, her face a mixture of awe and fear. This is my home, she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of history. This is where my people once lived. Jonas stared at her in disbelief. Your people? This place? It's ancient. How is it still here? The girl didn't respond immediately. She was too busy looking at the city, her eyes filled with a kind of longing that Jonas couldn't quite place. Finally, she turned back to him, her face solemn. My people, they were the builders of this city, she said, her voice cracking slightly. But we were forced to leave when the energy of the city became unstable. The power, it was too much, and it began to consume everything. Now, it's a forgotten place. The city's core is hidden, and so is the artifact. Jonas's mind raced as he processed her words. The city had once been a thriving hub of advanced technology, but something had gone wrong. The artifact, it seemed, was the key to everything, perhaps the reason for the city's downfall. I don't understand, Jonas said, frowning. Why do the mercenaries want the artifact? What's so special about it? The girl took a deep breath, her gaze still fixed on the glowing city. The artifact is part of the city's core. It holds the power to control everything here. If it falls into the wrong hands, it could bring the city back to life, or destroy everything. Jonas felt a chill run down his spine. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. He thought they were just running from mercenaries looking for a quick payoff. But now, it seemed they were caught in the middle of something much bigger, something far more dangerous. We need to find the core, the girl said suddenly, her voice firm. Before they do. Jonas nodded, though he wasn't sure how they could stop whatever was coming. The city was massive, its winding streets and towering structures stretching out before them like a maze. But there was no choice. They had to move fast. Whoever was after the artifact wasn't going to give up. And now, with the girl revealing the truth about her people and the power hidden here, Jonas realized that time was running out. They had to find the core. And they had to do it before the city, and everything it held, was lost forever. Jonas and the girl moved cautiously through the hidden city, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The massive ancient walls of the city loomed above them, covered in strange symbols and glowing faintly. It was beautiful, but also terrifying. Every step they took seemed to draw them deeper into something they didn't fully understand. The weight of the artifact in the girl's hands felt heavier with each passing moment, and Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. We need to get to the core, the girl said softly, her voice low but urgent. She had been walking ahead, her eyes scanning the environment. But now she paused to look back at Jonas. It's the only way to stop them. Jonas nodded. The girl had explained that the artifact, which she carried, was part of the city's heart, and if it fell into the wrong hands, it could bring the city back to life, or destroy everything. But finding the core was easier said than done. The city was vast and labyrinthine, full of hidden passages and forgotten chambers. Every corner seemed to hide new dangers, and Jonas wasn't sure who or what might be lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, a voice called out from behind them. Stop right there. Jonas spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his multi-tool. Standing at the entrance to one of the narrow side corridors was a figure in black armor, the same mercenary who had been part of the group chasing them earlier. But this time, something was different. The helmeted figure didn't look quite like the others. There was something off about the way they stood, something familiar in their posture. Who are you? Jonas demanded, his voice sharp. He could feel his pulse racing. He wasn't sure if they were still being hunted or if this was a trap. The mercenary took a step forward, and the shadows shifted, revealing more figures behind them. But it wasn't until the helmeted figure removed their helmet that Jonas's blood ran cold. Standing before him, in the same black armor as the others, was someone he never expected to see, someone he thought was lost forever. Sarah, Jonas gasped, disbelief flooding his voice. The woman before him was indeed Sarah, a former ally who had disappeared during a mission months ago. She had been a close friend, someone Jonas had trusted, and her sudden disappearance had left him with more questions than answers. Now here she was, standing as if nothing had happened, as if she had willingly joined the very group that had been chasing them. Jonas. Sarah's voice was cold, almost detached. I'm sorry it has to be this way, but you're in the way now. The girl beside Jonas stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. You were with them all along, she demanded, her voice full of disbelief. You were following us. Sarah didn't respond to the girl's question, but kept her gaze fixed on Jonas. I didn't have a choice, she said, her voice tinged with regret. They offered me a deal, a chance to survive, and now I'm here. Jonas felt a mix of anger and betrayal rising within him. Sarah had been one of the most trusted members of his team, someone who had fought alongside him in the past. But now, she was working for the very people they had been running from. You sold us out, Jonas said quietly, his voice tight with betrayal. I had no choice, Sarah repeated, her voice shaking slightly. They've been hunting me too. They know what I know about the artifact, about the core. They made me an offer I couldn't refuse. Jonas's mind raced. He didn't know if Sarah had been forced into this, or if she had willingly turned against them. But one thing was certain. She wasn't the ally he had once known. Sarah, we're not the enemy, Jonas pleaded, trying to reach the person he remembered. These people, they don't care about you. They're using you. You don't have to do this. For a moment, Sarah seemed to hesitate, her eyes flickering with doubt. But then, without warning, she stepped back and signaled to the mercenaries behind her. Do your job, she said quietly, her voice now devoid of emotion. Before Jonas could react, the mercenaries surged forward, weapons drawn. Jonas and the girl barely had time to defend themselves as the group closed in, forcing them to retreat into the narrow streets of the ancient city. The betrayal stung like a knife in Jonas's heart. Sarah, someone he had trusted with his life, had turned on him. He had no idea why, or what had driven her to make this choice, but there was no time to dwell on it now. They had to keep moving. Jonas grabbed the girl's hand, pulling her through the winding streets, away from the mercenaries. He could hear their footsteps close behind. But there was something else in the distance, a low, humming sound, like a distant engine, that seemed to grow louder with every passing second. Move faster, Jonas urged, his heart pounding. He didn't know where they were going, but he had to keep ahead of the mercenaries. Jonas and the girl sprinted through the narrow streets of the ancient city, the sound of pursuing mercenaries echoing behind them. Their footsteps were heavy, their breath shallow, but Jonas didn't dare slow down. He had no idea where they were going, but he knew that if they stopped, the mercenaries would catch up, and that would be the end. The girl's glowing artifact pulsed in her hands, casting an eerie light that flickered in the darkened passageways. Jonas could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else there too. Determination. She was more than just a frightened girl now. She was a survivor, and she wasn't going down without a fight. Keep going, Jonas urged, pulling her forward as they turned a sharp corner. The path ahead was still unclear, but every step they took brought them closer to something. He wasn't sure what, but it had to be better than being caught by the mercenaries. The low hum from the artifact grew louder as they moved deeper into the city. It was almost as if the city itself was alive, reacting to the presence of the artifact. Jonas couldn't help but feel that something big was about to happen, something that could change everything. They reached a large open plaza, and Jonas skidded to a halt, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of escape. The plaza was surrounded by tall, jagged stone columns, the remnants of ancient buildings that had long since collapsed. In the center of the plaza was a raised platform, and standing on it was a massive structure that Jonas could barely comprehend. It looked like a machine, but it was so old, so worn, that he couldn't tell what it was meant to do. This way, the girl shouted, pointing toward the platform. The core is inside. Jonas didn't question her. He grabbed her hand, and together they rushed toward the platform. But as they approached, the sound of heavy boots grew louder, and Jonas knew that the mercenaries were closing in. They were almost out of time. Just as they reached the platform, a voice boomed from behind them. "Stop right there." Jonas spun around to see Sarah, the mercenary who had betrayed them, standing at the edge of the plaza, flanked by several armed soldiers. Her eyes were cold, her expression unreadable. "I didn't want it to come to this, Jonas," Sarah said, her voice low and distant. "But you've left me no choice." The girl stepped forward, the artifact still glowing in her hands. "You don't understand," she said urgently. "This isn't just about us. It's about saving this city. If you let them take it, everything will be lost." Sarah hesitated, her gaze flickering between Jonas and the girl. But then she shook her head. "I'm sorry. I don't have a choice. You're both in the way." With that, she raised her weapon and aimed it directly at the girl. Jonas's heart raced as he lunged forward, throwing himself in front of her just as the first shot rang out. The blast hit him square in the shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground. "Jonas," the girl cried, her voice full of panic. Jonas gritted his teeth as pain shot through his body, but he pushed himself back up. He wasn't going to let Sarah, or anyone, take the girl. He had to protect her. The girl raised the artifact high above her head, and in that instant, the air around them seemed to vibrate with energy. The ground shook beneath them, and the columns around the plaza began to crack and crumble. "No," Sarah shouted, her voice filled with fear. "What are you doing?" But it was too late. The girl had unlocked the artifact's power. A blinding wave of light exploded from it, engulfing the entire plaza. Jonas shielded his eyes, but the energy from the artifact was so powerful that he could feel it coursing through him. The air was thick with energy, and the very ground beneath them seemed to tremble with the force. When the light finally faded, Jonas opened his eyes, blinking against the brightness. The mercenaries lay sprawled on the ground, unconscious. Sarah was nowhere to be seen. The girl slowly lowered the artifact, her face pale but determined. She turned to Jonas, her eyes filled with gratitude. "It's over," she said softly. "We've stopped them." Jonas nodded, his body still aching from the blast. But there was no time to rest. The city was changing, shifting, and they had to get to the core before anything worse happened. He pulled himself to his feet, his hand on the girl's shoulder. "Let's finish this. We've come too far to turn back now." Together, they moved toward the massive structure in the center of the plaza, the energy of the artifact still pulsing in the air around them. Whatever came next, Jonas knew they were ready. They had to be. The future of the city, and maybe even the galaxy, depended on it. Jonas and the girl walked toward the massive structure in the center of the plaza, their every step echoing in the silence that had followed the burst of light. The mercenaries were down, their weapons scattered on the ground. Sarah was gone, either knocked out by the energy wave or vanished into the ruins. The battle was over, but the war wasn't. The real fight was just beginning. The structure in front of them was unlike anything Jonas had ever seen. It towered above them, covered in ancient symbols that pulsed faintly, much like the artifact in the girl's hands. It was a strange mix of organic and mechanical design, as though the city itself had grown around the machine, as if it had been part of the city for centuries. The girl stopped in front of it, her eyes wide. She looked up at the structure, her face a mix of awe and fear. Jonas could see her trembling, but there was a fire in her gaze now, a sense of purpose that he hadn't seen before. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is the core." Jonas nodded. It had to be. The energy he felt in the air was coming from this structure, and it was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It was as if the city itself was alive, waiting for something, waiting for them. The girl stepped forward, her fingers brushing against the surface of the structure. The moment she touched it, the symbols on the walls around them glowed brighter, and the ground beneath them rumbled. Jonas felt his heart race as the city seemed to come alive, as though the structure was awakening after centuries of sleep. "The core controls everything," the girl said. "It holds the power of the city, but it's also dangerous. If it's activated the wrong way, it could destroy everything." Jonas's mind raced. The artifact, the girl, the city, it was all connected. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. They had to be careful. The wrong move could mean the end of everything they had fought for. "Do you know how to activate it?" Jonas asked, his voice steady but filled with urgency. The girl looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know. The city's technology is ancient. I've only heard stories. My people, they left because they couldn't control it. They feared it." Jonas took a deep breath, scanning the area for any clues. The symbols on the walls shifted, almost as if they were alive, rearranging themselves in a pattern that Jonas couldn't quite understand. But one thing was clear: the girl had the artifact, and the artifact was the key. "We have to try," Jonas said, his voice firm. He had no choice. They had come too far to turn back now. The girl nodded, stepping closer to the structure. She raised the artifact high above her head, and for a moment, nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a low hum, the structure began to glow. The energy in the air intensified, and the ground beneath them shook. Jonas braced himself, his hand gripping the girl's arm as the light from the core grew blinding. "This is it," the girl said, her voice filled with awe and fear. "This is what my people were trying to harness. The power of the city." The artifact in her hands pulsed with energy, and Jonas could feel the power radiating from it. It was overwhelming, almost too much to bear. He could sense that the core was responding to the artifact, acknowledging it, and the energy around them grew even stronger. But then, as the energy peaked, a deep, guttural sound filled the air. The structure began to crack, the walls shuddering as though the city itself was in pain. The light from the core grew so bright that Jonas had to shield his eyes. "Something's wrong," the girl cried, her voice filled with panic. Jonas felt the ground beneath them tremble violently. The walls around them cracked open, and a dark, swirling energy began to rise from the center of the core. It was as if the city was fighting back, as if the core had been disturbed in a way it wasn't meant to be. "No," the girl shouted. "This isn't how it's supposed to work." Jonas knew they had to stop it, but how? The power from the core was too much, too wild. He could feel it threatening to tear everything apart. In that moment, Jonas made a decision. He grabbed the girl's hand, pulling her away from the core. "We need to get out of here," he said urgently. "Now." But the girl hesitated, her eyes fixed on the core. "I can't leave it like this," she whispered, fear and determination warring in her gaze. "I have to fix it." Jonas didn't know if they could fix it, but he knew they had to survive. He pulled her with him, and together they ran, the energy of the core pulsing behind them, threatening to consume everything in its path. Jonas and the girl ran through the shaking streets of the ancient city, their footsteps echoing in the growing chaos behind them. The ground trembled underfoot, and the distant rumble of the core's unstable energy was getting louder. The structure they had awakened was threatening to collapse, and the city seemed to be on the brink of falling apart. Jonas's mind raced. He had no idea what had gone wrong, but the girl, her connection to the artifact, was their only hope. "Keep moving," Jonas shouted, pulling the girl along as they sprinted through the winding, narrow passageways of the city. The glow of the core's energy was faintly visible in the distance, casting a haunting light on the ruins. The girl was still holding the artifact tightly in her hands, but Jonas could see the fear in her eyes. She was struggling with the weight of the responsibility, unsure of what she had unleashed. But Jonas knew one thing: she had to believe in herself. This was her heritage, her people's legacy, and she could stop it if she had the courage to try. They reached a wide open square, the place where they had first encountered the mercenaries. It was empty now, the ruins surrounding them echoing with the silence of abandonment. But the vibrations from the core were growing stronger, and Jonas could feel the pressure building in the air. "What do we do now?" Jonas asked, his voice tight with urgency. The girl turned to him, her face pale but determined. "I don't know. I was never trained for this. My people left because they couldn't control it. But if I don't do something, everything will be destroyed." Jonas placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "You can do this. You're the key. You're the one who can make it right. You just have to believe." The girl nodded slowly, swallowing hard as she raised the artifact once again. The pulsing light from it seemed to answer her, vibrating in sync with her every movement. Jonas watched her, waiting, as the energy around them began to feel more intense, more alive. "Focus," Jonas urged. "Don't let it control you. You're in charge." She closed her eyes, her brow furrowed with concentration. The light from the artifact brightened, filling the square with a soft glow. Jonas held his breath, watching as she connected with the energy of the city, as if the artifact was guiding her, speaking to her. The ground beneath them rumbled again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't a violent shake, but a steady, resonant pulse, almost as if the city was beginning to calm. The girl's eyes opened, and for the first time, Jonas saw confidence in her expression. "It's working," she whispered, almost to herself. "I can feel it. The core is stabilizing. It's accepting the artifact again." Jonas exhaled, feeling the tension ease from his shoulders. The world around them was still shaking, but the energy from the core seemed to be lessening. The city was reacting to the girl's control, its ancient power slowly being guided back to its rightful balance. But even as the energy stabilized, Jonas knew they weren't safe yet. They had only a brief moment before the mercenaries could regroup or more danger could emerge. He grabbed the girl's arm, pulling her back toward the tunnels they had passed through earlier. "We need to leave. The city is going to be okay, but we're not safe yet. We have to get out of here." The girl nodded, though she didn't let go of the artifact. Together, they ran through the now stabilizing ruins, the path clearer than it had been moments before. The city seemed to be responding to the artifact's return, as if it were breathing again, slowly but steadily. As they reached the outer edges of the city, the girl stopped and looked back. The ruins stretched behind them, but now they were quiet, the energy that had once threatened to destroy everything now fading into a calm hum. "I never thought I'd be the one to save it," the girl said softly, her voice filled with awe. "I was just a girl from the ruins. I didn't know what I was meant to do." Jonas smiled, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "You've done more than you know. You've saved an entire city. You're stronger than you think." The girl looked at him, a small smile crossing her face. Maybe I am." They stood there for a moment, the ruins around them now peaceful, the danger finally past. The girl looked out across the horizon, her future uncertain, but her path clear. She had taken control of her legacy, and now it was time for a new chapter. Jonas watched her, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The world ahead of them was full of uncertainty, but they had survived the worst of it. And in that moment, Jonas realized that the girl, once a stranger, had become something more, a partner, a survivor, and a protector of a forgotten world.